Well, welcome to the January edition of Second Thursday presentation here at the National Automobile Museum. This is our first of the new year for our virtual and YouTube presentations. We're glad you're joining us. I'm Buddy Frank, and today we're going to talk about one of the very unique cars here at the museum. In fact, it's the very first car. Of course, we're very proud of this car, but not everyone agrees that it was really the first car. Most authorities cite the French inventor, Nicolas Joseph Cugnot. He built the world's first full-size, self-propelled land vehicle, effectively the world's first car or automobile. Officially, it was a steam-powered dray. A dray was normally a horse-drawn cart with two wheels. Cugnot's version actually had three wheels, with the front one acting as the drive wheel. A French general wanted Cugnot to design a wagon that could carry heavy cannons and wanted it to reach the unheard of speed of 2.5 miles per hour. He didn't want it to go faster than the troops could walk. Considering that no other mechanical device had ever moved at all, that was a pretty tall order. By 1769, Cugnot built a working full-size version of his steam wagon. It wasn't perfect, but it could move without a horse for 10 to 15 minutes at a time. Then it needed more water and time to build up steam in that front kettle you see. It was truly the first car. Unfortunately, it never survived intact. Parts of the engine are still in the Museum of Arts and Letters in Paris, but the full-size car dray you see here is a museum reproduction. The first gasoline car came in 1885 and is regarded by most as the first modern automobile. Its inventor was Germany's Karl Benz, who patented this Benz patent Motorwagen. Yes, it's the same guy from Mercedes-Benz. He received his patent on January 29th, 1886, just over 135 years ago. It used a one-cylinder, two-stroke gasoline-powered unit. And it was also the Germans again who came up with the first electric car. The Philion Elektrowagen is a four-wheel, battery-powered car designed by Andreas Philion and manufactured in 1888. It was a high-wheeled, iron-tired carriage wagon with a one-horsepower electric motor which sent power to the rear axle by means of leather belts. It was a wooden vehicle and is said to reach a top speed of 9 miles an hour despite weighing 882 pounds. So where were the Americans? Well, they were mostly riding bicycles. So it wasn't surprising that bike mechanics Frank and Charles Duryea of Springfield, Massachusetts are most often credited with designing the first successful American gasoline automobile. That was back in 1893. And they actually won the first American car race held in 1895. And they recorded the first sale of an American-made gasoline car the following year. This is our 1903 Duryea. It's called the Mermaid, and it's in our Gallery 1 right now. And it's perhaps the reason the Duryea brothers are credited with the first gasoline American automobile. It's not because it's first, it's because they were the first commercial success. After that first car, they produced many more, including our Mermaid. Charles continued to produce automobiles until at least the start of the Great War in 1917. But the honor of the first car should go to John Lambert of Union City, Ohio. While he never had a commercial success, he's recognized by the Smithsonian Institute as the inventor of America's first gasoline-powered car. It was called the Buckeye gasoline buggy. Perhaps even more notably, he's also credited with the first American automobile accident. During testing, he drove his buggy into a tree stump and then ran into a hitching post. Lambert was driving and carrying a passenger by the names of James Swovelan, a local drugstore owner. Apparently, neither man was wearing their seat belts at the time, but both escaped serious injury since they were doing less than 5 miles an hour. Worldwide, very interestingly, the first crash was actually Cugnot, who happened to back into a stone wall at the Paris Arsenal and landed himself in quite a bit of trouble. Lambert also patented a friction clutch arrangement, which was essentially a gearless transmission. He held over 600 patents in his career, most having to do with the automobile. He registered his first patent clear back in 1876 when he was just 16. He had made a corn seeder that revolutionized farming. But we're here today to talk about the museum's first car, the Philion. Except that the Philion wasn't really our first car. It was this one, which was the 1911 Maxwell that Mr. Harrah bought in 1947. Ironically, he thought he'd purchased a 1907 model Maxwell and went on to completely botch the restoration using wrong parts, wrong colors, wrong materials, and it was a lesson that taught him the value of good research. That led him to accumulate the world's best automobile library, which we still have today here at the museum in Reno, and to make sure that all his future restorations were accurate and 100% correct. He went on to build the world's greatest car collection, including the 1892 Philion. So why am I saying this car, the Philion, is the first? Well, to be completely accurate, it's the first car in Gallery 1. That is, if you don't count the 1902 Capital ahead of it. It's a steamer that we have in our blacksmith shop foyer that's right in front of Gallery 1. But as you'll soon learn, this car is quite historic on many counts, not the least of which is the unusual background of its inventor. There are a lot of famous names you'll see if you look in automotive books on the pioneers of the industry or on the internet. Some of the most prominent names are listed here, and we already mentioned a few like Benz, Duryea, and Lambert. But it's the rare publication that mentions our car or its inventor, and that's Achille Philion. Without a doubt, he was different from the others in some pretty interesting ways. Historian and author Jack Harpster has some background.
Achille Philion was born of French-Canadian parents in Saint-Martin, a small village near Montreal, Canada, before he finally moved to Ottawa, which of course is today's Canadian capital. Being raised in the Canadian wilderness in the mid-19th century was kind of tough when it came to recreation for a young fellow. It was here that Achille discovered a love for gymnastics. He spent hours on horizontal bars and trapezes he'd build in the forest with sawdust from nearby lumber mills acting as safety mats for him. When he was old enough, he was sent away to school, where in addition to academics, he continued to develop his gymnastic skills, which he had always enjoyed. Like many young men, Philion followed his passion and eventually joined the circus. Indeed, in 1872, after a few years with other shows, the young performer joined Hudson's North and South American Circus, a very large organization at that time. He soon developed a signature performance with an amazing feat of skill and daring. His rolling ball act made him one of the most popular and highest paid circus performers. An article in Scientific American magazine in 1904 proclaimed, quote, "an interesting feat in equilibrium. Upon a spiral tower with a runway 160 feet in length and only 16 inches wide, he ascends and descends the spiral, standing upon a large wooden ball. The ball he rolls with his feet, keeping it in the center of the runway, which is perfectly flat. The greatest incline is a 4.5 feet in 20-foot space. The ball's 28 inches in diameter and weighs 80 pounds. Now 10 minutes are required to make the entire trip up to the tower and back down to the ground again." Other performers who copied the stunt over the years found that the walk itself up and down the narrow spiral while balancing on a large globe was challenging enough. But Philion also juggled while moving the ball up and down the narrow corkscrew runway. He assumed the somewhat pompous nickname, the marvelous equilibrist and originator. Over the years, he added more and more features to the act, including several feats of daring on high wire walks.
Jack Harpster is a museum volunteer here in Reno, but more importantly, he's a distinguished author and historian who's written at least 9 books, most of them on Nevada topics and personalities. He did a recent article in Antique Automobile magazine about the Philion, and he's written several great books, including the 3 you see here. One is a biography about LeVere Redfield, a unique and colorful local resident who donated 2 historical vehicles to our museum collection. Another is a great history of early Reno called The Genesis of Reno. And the third you see here is the biography of Cy Red, the man who founded slot machine giant International Game Technology, or IGT. It's appropriately called the King of Slots. But during this presentation, we've called Philion the manufacturer builder of this car. In actuality, he didn't build any of it. He wasn't a mechanic nor a machinist. But he was an inventor and took his unfinished road carriage along with him as he traveled the country performing his act. He had various machinists and carpenters add to his creation as he went from town to town across the country. Back to our query, is the Philion the oldest surviving American automobile? If it was, that's really saying something considering some of the abuse it suffered in Hollywood, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But again, while our car is quite a survivor, and it's certainly old, is it the oldest survivor? Well, depending on the specific category, there are a few cars ahead of ours, like the oldest car that still runs. That title goes to the 1885 Philion Bouton. It was named after Philion's mother, Marquesa, and it was a quadricycle design. While it's not much to look at, this car last sold in 2011. It actually set an auction record for an early automobile. Guess how much? $4.6 million. Here at the National Automobile Museum, we have a later 1901 Philion Bouton, a Model A number 2 in our Gallery 1. It's currently not in running condition, but our collections manager, Jay Hubbard, says it could be without too much work. But that car is French. What's the oldest surviving American automobile? Well, sadly, it's not the Philion either. Sylvester Howard Roper of Boston, Massachusetts, was a great inventor. In the late 1850s, he invented the hand-stitched sewing machine. By 1861, he invented a series of hot air engines. Roper later worked for the Springfield Armory during the Civil War. But near the end of that war, in 1865, he built a steam carriage, one of the earliest automobiles in America ever produced. It's not in running condition, but it was so revolutionary at the time that folks actually paid money just to see the car run down the road. Today you can see it at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Roper also invented the first motorcycle, an accomplishment that got him into the Motorcycle Hall of Fame in 2002. Remember, he worked for the Springfield Armory and therefore was also the inventor of the shotgun choke and a revolver repeating shotgun during his days there at Springfield. On a visit to our museum, you'll notice that many of these early automobile brands you'll see never made it to the 20th century, and certainly not the 21st century. Can you guess which brand did? Did you guess Buick? David Dunbar Buick, a plumber and inventor, invented or built his first 2 cars in 1899 and 1900. He officially founded the Buick Motor Company in May 19th, actually, 1903. Today it's still the oldest, still active automobile brand in America, and one of the oldest in the world. You could make the claim that Mercedes-Benz is the oldest brand based on the work of founder Carl Benz. In America, Oldsmobile held that title for years since Ranson Eli Olds, later of REO truck fame, started his car company in 1897. However, the last Oldsmobile rolled off the assembly line in April of 2004, and that left only Buick. Cadillac and Ford both produced their first cars in 1903, so Buick actually beat them by 4 years. By the way, we have both the 1903 Cadillac and the 1903 Ford in our Gallery 1. They were the first-year production models for both companies and are similar rear-entry runabouts. Not everyone's aware that Henry Ford actually designed and worked on a 1903 Cadillac before he got into an argument or disagreement with management, and he left to form his own company, which became today's Ford Motor Company. Henry Leland took over at Cadillac, and as mentioned, both competing vehicles came out the same year with nearly identical looks, and both are still doing pretty well today. But we think our Philion is still pretty special and perhaps the second oldest surviving American car in the world. But it can't compete against the DDO in the category of oldest car that still runs. But maybe it can in the future. We think that it could be restored. You always have to be careful with steam vehicles, just like railroad locomotives, because of the potential for overexpansion and steam explosions. It happens. However, the operating pressure of the Philion is only 50 pounds per square inch, and that's far below the pressure of a railroad steam engine, for example. So the risk is small. The late local steam expert, Cal Tinkham, took a look at our boiler back in the 1970s and gave it an okay for restoration. The boiler itself, as you can see in this photo, appears to be in good condition. Originally, the operator in the rear seat had to put coal in the burner, which is located here where the arrow shows you, just behind this water pump. It's a small opening and somewhat difficult to access to get the coal into the firebox. However, Philion later converted the burner to oil, and the oil tank is now located below the rear driver's seat, and the feed is nearly automatic, and that makes it a lot easier to raise steam and fire the boiler. To keep that steam coming, you need water. And to make sure there was enough water in the boiler, you had to pump this handle side to side or left to right. You'll see a great example of someone doing that in the film clip, Excuse My Dust, that's coming up. The handle's connected to the pump, which is this brass cylinder circled here that feeds water to the boiler. The pump handle and cylinder seem to be in good shape and could easily be restored to working condition. Well, once the boiler reaches its operating pressure of 50 pounds per square inch, steam is fed to two pistons located on each side of the front boiler. They both drive a standard crankshaft, which is connected to the flywheel and the front drive gear. Again, they appear to be in good shape. On the left, you can see the small gear that's on the end of the crankshaft. The chain is then wrapped around that gear and feeds the larger gear on the rear wheel, that's shown on the right. That drive gear is attached directly to the axle and powers both the rear wheels. The chain is certainly old, but it would probably work okay with some cleanup and a little lubrication. So once you get it rolling, how do you stop? Well, the brake is simply a leather band. It's wrapped loosely around a drum attached to the rear drive axle. To stop, you simply press your foot on the back of the strap, increasing the tension. There is no front brake, so remember, that's just one more reason that operating the Philion only from the front seat would be a disaster. Notice in this photo that the front of the strap is attached with a piece of wire. The strap should be continuous all the way to the floorboard, but it simply fell apart, and the wire was added to temporarily hold what was left in place. It would probably be easy to make a new replacement brake. The biggest problem is probably the wheels. They're spoked, but in an unusual manner. Like a bicycle, the spoke end goes into a threaded nipple in the rim, but unlike a bicycle, the spoke then loops through the hub and then back down and out to another threaded nipple in the rim again. With a normal bike wheel, each spoke is individual and terminates at the hub. With the solid metal wheels, you see, the ride is quite rough, and it's also quite destructive on the wheels and spokes over time. But again, these wheels could be repaired, but they would require an awful lot of work and a fair amount of materials to bend them through that hub. Finally, there's the steering mechanism. This is the main wheel located to the left of the rear driving position. I mentioned rear because at one time this carriage could be driven, or at least steered, either from the front or the back. In Gallery 1, you can see a photo of both seats occupied. And here's some other shots. In this historic photo, early race car driver Barney Oldfield on the left is driving from the front. The photo on the right is from the movie The Magnificent Ambersons that we'll discuss later. But in that one, you can see the Philion is being driven from the rear. It would be most unlikely that a solo driver would be up front like Oldfield, since the car would soon run out of steam without the water pump and the boiler being maintained. Plus, he'd have no way to apply the brake to stop. But this was just a publicity photo of Oldfield. Notice, too, that the car is not exactly designed for a large man. Again, it was most common for the driver to steer from the front with a fireman manning the rear seat, firing the boiler, pumping the water, and maintaining pressure and oiling. In this patent drawing from 1892, you can see the arrangement of both steering wheels, with the front one attached by chain to the main rear steering wheel shaft. In this shot from our Gallery 1, these two shots, you can see that the front steering wheel and the mechanism is missing. If you look underneath the carriage, you'll see the wire struts on the axles near each wheel, leading only to the rear. The entire front steering mechanism, the wheel, shaft, and chain are now missing. Only the hole in the front floorboard remains of that steering wheel arrangement. That missing equipment is probably somewhere in the dump in Hollywood, California, since that's where the car made its last stop before being acquired by the Hera Automobile Collection, and then on to us here at the museum. It was used as a movie prop or a model for a prop in at least 2 movies. The most notable film was The Magnificent Ambersons by legendary director Orson Welles. This was a major Hollywood production, and a large part of the script focused on the creation of a Morgan automobile, with Mr. Morgan being played by star Joseph Cotten. Again, it was a major Hollywood studio movie, and of course they did lots of publicity photos like this one, where our car was featured with 2 young starlets. In the clip that follows, actor Cotten is trying to court the attention of lead actress Ann Baxter, and he's seen driving the car with a bouquet of flowers.
To drink the other night right out here, and stepped clean through the bass fiddle to serenade me.
Well, I haven't seen her since she got back from abroad.
Isabel? Well, sir, I don't know as I know just how to put it, but she's kind of a delightful looking young lady.
Wilbur.
Well, the Philion, or Morgan as it's called in that movie, also pops up in a few other scenes. Many have said that our car was also in the 1951 movie Excuse My Dust, starring Red Skelton, the comedian, Sally Forrest, and MacDonald Carey. This one is a musical comedy, and it tells the story of early automobile inventor Red Skelton. Near the end of the movie, he enters his car in a race. His car is number 8, and one of his main rivals is the Philion, which is car number 6. Please remember that this was a Hollywood production, and they took some tremendous liberties with the Philion, or what could be mistaken for the Philion. Look closely at this still photo from the film. The first thing that's noticeable are the wheels. They've been beefed quite a bit from the spoked original. They almost look like struts on these wheels, which is good, since our spoked wheels would never have survived in a race like the one shown in the movie. They appear to be going about 20 miles an hour or more in the film, but the real Philion had trouble doing much more than 8 miles an hour. Look closely at the boiler. It's black rather than brass, but certainly they could have painted it. But the size is wrong too. It's too narrow by several inches. This was obviously just a prop car built for the movie, but designed closely on the Philion, which was owned by the time by a Hollywood prop company. Thankfully, it was not our car in the explosion scene racing Red Skelton. By the way, do you know what car he was driving? It was an early Sears. So finally, look at the side railing on the seat. The ones on the actual Philion are low and flimsy. These are higher and made of wood and a lot sturdier. That's a good thing because the driver probably would have fallen out of our car at the speed shown in the movie and the maneuvers they made. So the final score is that the Philion was definitely in the Magnificent Amberson and running, but it was only in Excuse My Dust in spirit. As they say in Hollywood, a stunt double or a stand-in did all of the actual scenes. Where did our museum get this rare car? Well, that's an interesting story too. Philion only had this car for about 6 years. Since he was primarily a circus man at heart, it's not that unusual that he sold it to a zoo, specifically the Selig Zoo, owned by Colonel William Selig of Los Angeles. This zoo in East LA was actually a combination zoo and movie studio, and that's how the car eventually got into the movies. That zoo today is the Los Angeles Zoo and Botanical Gardens. The car was then sold to Pacific Auto Rental, also in Los Angeles, which also did movie rentals, just like Selig's. Ralph Dunwitty, working for Harrah's Automobile Collection, discovered the car and eventually worked out a swap in 1973, trading a 1926 Lincoln Phaeton and an unrestored 1931 Pierce Arrow Roadster for the Philion Steam Carriage. At the time, they valued the car at $30,000. In July of 1987, the car was donated to our museum by the Harrah's Hotels and Casinos. A more recent appraisal, but one still over 20 years ago, put that figure at $125,000. What's with the faded name of Amy written on the side of the front driver's seat? It shows well in this photo, but it's really hard to see in person. And if you look very closely, you can actually see that Amy's name was actually painted over another girl's name, Violet. The records don't say for sure, but one early article in a magazine said that Colonel Selig actually painted several girls' names on the car over the years, depending on who he was courting at the time. In summary, we can say for sure that our Philion is one of the oldest surviving American automobiles. It's also undeniably the very first car in Horseless Carriage Gallery 1. And that's one of the country's finest displays of early automobiles. Plus, the car was a proven movie star in at least one movie, and certainly the inspiration for another. And for certain, no other car manufacturer anywhere in the world in the past or up to the present day was capable of juggling while standing on top of a ball while rolling it up a multi-story ramp. We hope you'll enjoy seeing this unique car in person, and maybe you'll understand why we think it's still the first car in many, many categories. I hope you join us again Thursday afternoon, February 11th for our next Second Thursday Talk, or catch it later, or this one on YouTube. We remind you that we just opened a new and spectacular exhibit called Low and Slow about lowriders. The beauty and craftsmanship behind these cars, motorcycles, trikes, bicycles, and pedal cars is amazing. That new exhibit runs from now until the end of April here in downtown Reno. You won't want to miss it. Again, I'm Buddy Frank and hope to see you soon here at the National Automobile Museum in Reno.